Hi, I'm Dr. Jackson Crawford. I'm an Old Norse specialist teaching at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'm here in the old Crawford workshop in central Colorado to make a forced metaphor to introduce the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda. Anyone who works with wood knows that the wood that you're using may have been chopped down a long time ago and may have been chopped down recently. The forest it came from might be on another continent or it might be local. But the tools that you use, which you have either inherited or which you have bought or whatever, are going to be used by you to put together wood from all kinds of different sources into a new finished product, say a cabinet or something. In much the same way, the Codex Regius of the Poetic Edda is a compilation of poems that come from many different places and times. It is not the work of a single author. It is a widespread misunderstanding that it is the work of Snorri Sturluson, but Snorri Sturluson is the author of the Prose Edda, which is a different book. I have a video where I talk about the differences between them, which I'll link in the top right. Now let's talk more about the Codex Regius itself. This manuscript is called that because it was part of the royal collection of manuscripts in Denmark. But there are many manuscripts in the world that are called Codex Regius because there have been many royal libraries. So, for instance, there's also a Codex Regius of the New Testament. There's a Codex Regius even of Snorri's Prose Edda. But the Codex Regius in Old Norse studies usually refers to the manuscript that is the source of most of the poems that are called the Poetic Edda. This manuscript is technically called GKS 2365 Quarto. GKS stands for Gammel Kongelig Samling, which is just Danish for Old Royal Collection. 2365 is the number that identifies the manuscript, and quarto indicates its size. A quarto manuscript is roughly the same size as a typical book today. This manuscript consists of 45 leaves, that is 45 physical sheets of vellum, so not paper but actual calf skin that has been painstakingly prepared to be written on. Those 45 leaves make up 90 pages in the sense that we would use pages. The leaves are identified by numbers, so you have 1 through 45, and then you have a recto and a verso. So the front side of each leaf, that page, is called, say, 1 recto, and then the back side of that same leaf, that next page, is called 1 verso. So that's how we talk about the location of particular poems or parts of them in the manuscript. Sometimes you'll see this manuscript called Konungsbok, which is just Icelandic for the same thing. It is the King's Book. There are 29 poems included in Konungsbok. The first half or so concern the Norse gods or notable elves and dwarves, like in the poems Volundarkvida and Alvismol. And then the second half concerns human heroes, particularly the humans of the family, the Volsungs. These poems about the Volsungs form the basis for the prose saga of the Volsungs, which will appear in a new translation by me in September 2017, together with its medieval sequel, the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok. Now, the handwriting in the Codex Regius is Carolingian insular. This style is based on the Carolingian style that was popular in early medieval Europe, but also includes some insular, i.e. British features, like the insular F. There are certain features of the manuscript that show that it was actually copied from an earlier manuscript. So if the Codex Regius is a compilation, it actually is a copy of the compilation. That original compilation was probably made around 1200, based on spelling mistakes that we see in the Codex Regius. Think about if you were copying something from, say, Shakespeare's day, and you were trying to change all the thous and these into you, but you sometimes slip and you include a thou or a thee. Someone looking at your handwriting several hundred years later and seeing those thous and these sometimes pop up would realize that you were copying from an older source that had those thous and these. And that's one way that we can kind of tell that the manuscript is older. There's also features of the spelling that suggest that it's older, including the spelling of the I umlaut of long O. This vowel is different from the I umlaut of long A, which is written ash, in early Icelandic, but by about 1250 these two had merged and they were both written with ash. So if you compare older Icelandic, Old Norse bukr, books, with Asir, the family of gods that includes Odin, Thor, and Frigg, you see those have different vowels, but in modern Icelandic those are Bækur and Æsir with the same vowel, and that merger had already occurred by about 1250. So the the copyist who made the Codex Regius manuscript that we have had that merger, but the manuscript that was being copied from didn't, and we sometimes see the old vowels pop through. We also sometimes see, for instance, the letter thorn used where later Icelandic writing would use an ev, and the use of thorn for both thorn and ev is a characteristic of very early Icelandic manuscripts. There are also some interesting facts, like the fact that Hofmál, the poem of Odin's wisdom, is probably copied from a different manuscript than the other poems of the Codex Regius are copied from. That's interesting in and of itself. It suggests that our copyist was not just slavishly copying from whatever the original manuscript was, but also was deliberately creating a compilation of mythological poems. There are some prose insertions. We don't necessarily know if the prose that sometimes precedes, sometimes is in between, sometimes at the end of different poems, is very old, or if this is something that comes from the copyists in 1200 or 1270. There is also a lacuna, or a missing gap of pages. This includes 8 leaves, or 16 pages, which take up the end of the poem called Sigurdrifamal, where the Valkyrie Sigurdrifa, or Brynhild, gives her advice to the hero Sigurd, and include almost all of the poem that would be referred to as Sigurdar in Meri, the larger poem about Sigurd. This is the part that's left is called Brot of Sigurdar in the Poetic Edda. The Saga of the Volsungs fills in some of that gap, but as far as we know, the greater poem about Sigurd is basically lost. For the most part, the poems that appear in Konungsbók are only found there, with a couple of exceptions. Snorri Sturluson, in his prose Edda, does quote many of the poems, especially Völuspá. And Völuspá itself is also in the manuscript called Hauksbók, which is later than the Codex Regius, and includes some stanzas that aren't in the Codex Regius version. There is another manuscript, AM 748 Quarto, that includes a few other poems that are also in the Codex Regius, Vafthrudnismal, Grímnismal, Forskýrnis or Skýrnismal, Horbarsljóð, Himiskviða, Völundarkviða, and it also has the additional poem Baldur's Draumar. There are also a couple other poems that are sometimes included in translations of the Poetic Edda. My translation, for instance, includes Baldur's Draumar from AM 748 Quarto. It also includes Ríkisþula, Grótasöngr, and Völuspá and Skama or Hyndluljóð, the latter of which is from the manuscript called Flateyjarbók. Well, I hope this has helped give you a little bit more context about this incredible book. I hope that you'll look at some other videos on my channel that concern particular poems that are in that book, including Völuspá, the story of the creation and destruction of the world, and Lokasenna, the story of Loki's insults for the gods. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.